Welcome to the Stay Human podcast. The Stay Human podcast was created with the purpose of demystifying sales and what it means to be a great salesperson. This podcast will help you master the necessary communication skills to be the best that you can be. Whether you are just starting off your career or want to brush up on your sales skills, this is the place for you. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether it's your professional or personal life. This is the one thing all successful people know how to do well. So if you're ready, let's get started. Here is your host, Malvina.
Hello and welcome back to the Stay Human podcast. So excited that you're joining me for yet another episode. On today's episode, we are talking about a topic that has probably affected all of us. I mean, just think in your workplace or at home, someone says something that potentially you don't agree with, or they say something that irritates you or annoys you, and immediately our impulse is to react, to say something that ultimately, probably 5 minutes later, we are going to regret. So to help me explore this topic in more detail, I am joined today by Kevin McCarney. He is the author of Big Brain, Little Brain. Now, we all want to use language as an asset rather than a liability. And what Kevin does is he explains how we can focus more on utilizing the big brain, limiting what our little brain tells us to do, and ultimately jumping to this neutral zone where we are really aware of the situation and are able to respond in a more rational way. Kevin explains it perfectly. Ultimately, our little brain, that's the impulse. That's the fight or flight reaction in all of us. And big brain is all around being rational and how we can make rational decisions and also communicate with others in a rational way. So I'm super excited for you to listen to this episode. Communication is such a huge asset and so important, especially in the world of sales. So if you're ready for today's episode with Kevin McCarney, author of Big Brain, Little Brain, let's get started. Kevin, welcome to the Stay Human podcast.
Malvina, thank you so much for having me here.
I am excited to have you on to talk about a topic that I have not yet covered on the podcast, and that is around how our brain works, our communication, what we say to others. And obviously, I want to talk about your book, Big Brain, Little Brain. But before we dive in, tell me a little bit about your background.
I have been in the customer service business all my life, it seems. Like even when I wasn't of working age, I was mediating my family, because a large family, 4 older brothers, 2 younger sisters. So I was always dealing with people. And when I got into customer service, when I got into retail and restaurants and other businesses, I really saw a pattern of communication. And, you know, I've worked many different kinds of jobs, but the same pattern would show up in virtually every job. I would see how people would miscommunicate and how people would communicate really well. And so I just kept taking notes. And so for many moons, I was looking at how can I get better at communicating and how can I be more effective at communicating? Because it's one thing just to say the words, but that doesn't mean you've communicated well. And so I've been really studying the idea of how we communicate and what really has a resonance in when we communicate.
You're making me laugh a little bit. I mean, that's what my husband tells me all the time. You know, just because you said it doesn't mean we're communicating. Right?
Well, yes.
It's always an interesting one. And I think with communication, and we've all had instances in our career or even, you know, in our personal life, just communicating with our spouse or with our family members where we want to say something. Sometimes we say it in a way that is clear for us, but the other person just doesn't get the message.
This just happens more often than we want it to. One of the things that I talk about too is that, you know, even when we're upset, even when, you know, we've been surprised or all of a sudden we're getting information it just made us a little more emotional than we were moments before. We have control over that moment. as long as we know we have control. But sometimes people go, well, I was triggered now, so I just said this. And I back away from that. I tell people, I think when it comes to communication, you can get activated. Somebody can annoy you, something can bother you, but doesn't mean just because you feel you have a right to say something. There's a difference between having a right to say something and the right thing to say for that moment to make that moment more productive. Because we all feel sometimes like, oh, I've got to get back at somebody because they disrespected something I did, or my baseball team, or or some other period of my life. They're saying something, and we feel like, well, if they're saying that, then I have a right to get back at them. And I think the internet has done a wonderful job of helping people like you and I communicate across great distances, but it's also got a dark side in that it kind of makes people a lot more impulsive. And when they want to communicate, almost as if because somebody says something, you immediately have to say something back. And one of the things I really push is you don't have to say anything back right away. That's little brain territory. Little brain is that impulsive part of our brain that's that reptilian brain, that's fight or flight. Like you feel challenged. Oh, I got to fight back. And little brain will say that sarcastic, snarky comment. And little brain is not a good listener. So it's really when we talk about is getting big brain to control the little brain. And when you have a pressure moment like that, where all of a sudden somebody is rude or disrespects you, and I call these things activators. They'll activate that little emotion in you. You haven't done anything yet, but it activates, like you feel like, ooh, I really feel like I want to say something here. If you signal to your big brain to take over, big brain is in control. It's thoughtful. It's a good listener, and big brain builds trust. And in all these communications that I've seen over the years, it really comes down to once you're someone thinking about somebody and the way they communicate, that one of the key words that comes up is trust. I don't trust the way they communicate, or I really trust that person.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It sounds almost like the little brain is that impulsive aspect of our nature, and we all have it within us. Some of us are able to control it a little bit better than others. And the big brain is really that rational motor behind it all. Am I right?
That's absolutely right. That's correct. That's a perfect way to put it. It really is that difference between that primal little brain wanting to just be territorial and fight. That's the fight or flight brain, they call it, and then the bigger brain, the neocortex, where we know better. I know better, and so what we try to do is give people a couple tools to get to big brain quicker, and don't let little brain take over this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to explore some ways in which we can tap into our big brain a little bit better. But I want to share potentially a story that someone shared with me earlier in my career. And they said, Malvina, if someone annoyed you or they said something you didn't like and you have that impulse to write back and you're drafting that email, it's fine. Put it all in an email, but don't send it. Because more often than not, you will regret it once you send it, because obviously you can't retract it. Do you think that's a good way of coping with that impulse of actually just getting your thoughts and your frustration on paper, seeing it,
yes,
and then backspacing it?
I think it's different for many people, but I think that's one good methodology that works. And what I do is to tell people to put a folder on their desktop, Little Brain, right? And collect Little Brain stories from the news media and stick them in that folder. And also that's where you put that email. And so you can put it in there. And if you really feel you need to say it, maybe there's some critical information that you can distill that a week later and put it out there. But the idea that we have to immediately respond because we're not face to face with the person, and face to face actually gives us a completely different view and a way of talking to people. Our voice changes, our tone changes. Emails really difficult to express an emotion. In an email. I mean, emojis, I don't think really do it, but it really comes down to your friend was right. Just vent it out, get it all out so that it's there. And what I've asked some people do is print it out and burn it, trash it, get rid of it. It's an old methodology. People have been using this for decades. The idea is you've got those emotions in you and you want to vent them. You want to do something with them. the best thing you can do is not send it to anybody, because it will come back and bite you. I think one of the things we talk about is every conversation, every communication has a ripple effect, good or bad. And so if you send out an email that has a negative connotations, even if you meant everything so well, but the person on the other end is going to take it wrong, then that's going to have a negative ripple effect that you're going to have a cleanup to do, to sort of tell people, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. So I would always recommend writing it down, journal it for sure. If emails can be a little tricky because it's too close to the send button, but definitely journal this stuff, because there's a kinesthetic value to writing something with your hand. And even whether you want to write your hand, with my handwriting, it's a little difficult, but for typing it up like on a Word document and put it in a folder, you'll see that. And what I ask people to do is go through their old emails and see if there's anything, old emails that they have in there that, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned a very interesting point. So often we say things a lot more freely because we almost feel there's no consequence if we put it in an email or in a text message. And then you meet the person face to face and they're a completely different individual. You just can't link up the email that they sent, the messaging, the wording, yes, the lack of emotion because it's difficult to convey in writing. But sometimes those, the same individual can be two completely different people depending on which way they're communicating.
Yes. And I think that one of the things that I try to get people to understand is that every day is going to be a little bit different for people. I think the last year and a half has been more difficult for a lot of people. And so people are going through different things. You don't know what's going on in somebody's life sometimes. And so if you get a nasty email from somebody, don't return it right away. Take your time, let it sit there. And maybe you'll get an email from the person apologizing for it. And that's happened several times because people begin to realize, oh, that impulsive nature of me sending out this, I've got a right to say this. I have to say this, and versus, you know what, that wasn't the right thing to say because, and now this has created a rift between us. And that's not what the intention was. The intention was to get out the frustration, but every communication we have does have a little bit of a ripple effect. And I think one of the things we talk about, if I want to go there, is when we're under pressure, and it happens a lot. And I think right now, the entire world is on a scale of 1 to 10, they're in anxiety level 8. Right. So it doesn't take much to push them over the edge. Yeah. And whether it's a communication, an email or text even. And I recommend periods of time with any communication before responding if somebody sent you a little brain email. But one of the things that I think we can do is when we know we're activated, when we feel like, oh, I'm really bugged right now. Certain things that bug us, whether it's, somebody cuts us off in traffic, right? And it's like, oh, and there's a sense I've got to get back at that person. And the reality is you don't. Somebody says something that interrupts you in a conversation. Oh, I've got to get back. They shouldn't have done that. You don't have to. Sometimes you just let it go and you have time to respond properly. One of the tools that we talk about is this tool that I call neutral, because everybody knows that about the fight or flight brain, right? That's the little brain, fight or flight. But there's more than that. There's more. There is actually a space in our brain. It gets stronger every time we use it, that can help us control ourselves in that pressure moment. I think Viktor Frankl said it best. He's an Australian neurologist and psychologist, survived 4 different concentration camps. He said, between a stimulus and a response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. And what he means is that when something happens, before you do anything or say anything, there's a space. And I call it neutral. Get to neutral. And in the book, if you want to go to it, there's neutral words. And I think everybody has their own neutral word already, because in their pressure situations, sometimes we'll use it. Mine is when I walk into my house after a very, very long day. I want to just walk in and just take it easy. It's like a 20-hour day. And all of a sudden there's 20 choir kids singing and dancing. Right. So I walk in, I go, okay, what do we got here? And it was the breathing out of that tension and the using of that word in a very positive tone that made that moment okay. But can you imagine if I'd walked in and I went, okay, what's going on? It changes everything. So neutral is a space we all have. We have to practice to get to it a little more often. And one of the ways we do that is really practicing our tone of voice, because the tone is the message. And tone when we're speaking is so important. And we know that because when we're little kids, we don't know what our parents are saying for the first couple of years. We have no idea. But we know that tone, and we know the tone means something. And we never really lose our ability to separate the words and the tone. So if we can control our tone, and no matter how upset somebody is, and especially in a workplace, so many different things happen. It's easy for something to go wrong. But if we can control our tone, get people to neutral, they can pivot. It's like an immediate awareness of, oh, I better not let my little brain take over here. Let me use my neutral word, and it'll just be a signal, a momentary signal to my big brain, take over here, because little brain's going to create a problem you're going to have to clean up.
Absolutely. It makes me laugh because I think in the corporate world, everyone says, if there's an idea, someone is pitching an idea, or they say something that, you don't agree with, you don't like the idea, potentially it's not the way you want it to be headed, rather than saying, I'm against it, I don't like it, I think we should do it a different way. The word or the phrase that a lot of us would use is, oh, that's interesting.
That's so perfect.
That's an interesting
it's exactly, and that's your neutral word. That's your neutral response to that situation where you really want to say, no, I think this is crazy, right? But in this moment, no, I'm just going to say, oh, that's interesting. And it gives you time to ponder, and it gives the other people time to ponder, but it's an escape valve for not going into a situation. We don't have to win every argument or every comment that's made. We don't have to win every time. Sometimes you says something exactly the way you put it. We don't always have to challenge that. We can let it go in that moment and come back. We can circle back and deal with it properly. That's what big brain will do. Little brain, on the other hand, will call people out and say, no, I think that's crazy. And it creates a negative ripple effect. And I think that one of the things that in the workplace, I think that's the most important, and I've been dealing with employees and customers my whole life, is everybody comes to work under a different set of circumstances. Everybody comes to work, they have different pressures on their life. And so sometimes at work, it's easy for them to snap a little bit. But one of the tools that we talk about in the book is sort of to completely get away from the negative is, can we find something nice to say about people when they're not there? And I'll give you the quick story is I had a terrific chef working for me and a terrific manager. And all of a sudden they weren't talking. They'd been together for 3 or 4 years. All of a sudden for about 6 months, they were not talking. Nobody knew what went wrong. I tried to get them to go together. Absolutely nothing. Oh my gosh, it was frustrating. So the chef, Patricia, was going to be off when we were having a big meeting. So I called the manager in and I said, Robert, listen, I need you to pick out 3 things that Patricia does really well. And so, well, I can think of 3 things she doesn't. I said, I get it. Give me 3 things she does really well. And he says, oh, she's always on time and she's impeccably dressed. She's great with customers. Okay, great. Now, tomorrow at the meeting, she's not going to be there. I want you to finish the meeting. The last thing you're going to say is those 3 things that she does really well. Okay, that's all. And you're going to end the meeting. 24 hours later, after that meeting, he walks in, and from the corner of the kitchen, he hadn't heard from in a long time. Good morning, Robert. How are you?
Oh, interesting.
And what had happened is in 24 hours, she had heard that he said something nice about her. And so we called this good gossip because it travels the same path as gossip. But when you say something nice about somebody when they're not there in front of other people, it has a twofold effect. The person who you're talking about is going to hear about it. We know in today's workplace, they hear about it rather quickly, but they'll always hear about it. But it also sends a message to the other employees. Oh, if that's what he's saying about her when she's not here, he must be saying something like that about me when I'm not here. So it builds trust. It builds trust because it's like, oh, I see. Because instead of like, yeah, he's got a right to say some snappy things about her because they don't get along. Instead, completely turned it around, and it made such a difference in that team atmosphere there. And so we really focus on the big brain aspects of a team communication, of the culture communication, because gossip is that silent cancer in any culture. But good gossip is a strategic tool. It's got to be honest, otherwise it won't resonate. But it really makes a difference in every workplace that we've used it.
And we hear about gossip all the time. We very rarely hear about that good, positive gossip.
Yeah, it's good. Gossip is everywhere. Headlines in newspapers, gossip, everything. A lot of social media is more gossip than it is information. But in the workplace, it's especially destructive because it starts a rumor, and it's so hard to clean that up sometimes. But good gossip is the sort of anti-gossip, you want to call it, is going to really help the culture and help people talk about other people. It's an example that you can set as a leader to show people this is how you should be talking about your fellow compadre at work.
I love that. And just hearing you say that reminds me so much of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? That positive, good gossip. Ultimately, you're going to get supporters behind you. You're going to build a team. You're going to be liked. And that likability factor, especially in the workplace, also plays a huge role.
That you're so right on that. And I think that you made a really good point there. And that is, you're going to be seen as a leader, and people are going to want to work with you, because they like you and because they can see they can trust you. That's the person they're going to gravitate toward. And they'll even come up with putting in extra effort because of the way you're treating them. It's one thing to have a job description. It's another thing to have a culture that rewards people emotionally for just doing the right thing.
Absolutely. Kevin, what are some tips for our listeners as to how we can tap into that big brain quicker, faster, without dwelling in that little brain zone?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things is be aware of the moment you're in. And again, we all get surprised. And like I said, just think about somebody cutting you off in traffic. That's really when little brain wants to take over. But that's when big brain is going to save you from creating any future problems. But one of the quickest things you can do is every day practice your neutral words, or if you want to make it a neutral phrase, practice that tone of voice. Start every morning with that tone of voice. And there's a checklist in the book to say, start every morning. There's 8 essential areas in life, family, friends, money, time. Time is a big pressure for a lot of people, but take a morning check. Is anything ready to go into little brain mode? You're going to be money problems. That could affect your communication. But the quickest way for you to do this is to think about neutral and pivoting. And in any situation, tap into that big brain, be more thoughtful, think about what big brain would do. And I don't want to make it like it's a person, but it's what would my big brain say here? Because in every situation we get into, in every situation where we get activated, somebody at a restaurant, and I've seen so many times people overreact in a restaurant. And I tell people, listen, I am in the business. My business is serving food. And I have been doing that for decades now. And I've been training my staff. And one of the things we train about is, people come in. We're in the business of serving people with low blood sugar. they're already diminished a little bit by the time they get to us because they're hungry. And they've been thinking about that food for 2 hours. And so, and then if there's anything else that's going on in their life, if somebody that got yelled at work or something's not going well, they come in, they're looking for that comfort. Our job is to make sure that they find it and to make sure that we make it right. The restaurant business is a very, very big brain business. You've got to be in big brain all the time because you just don't, you can't afford to go little brain. Customers can go little brain sometimes, and you've got to bring them back. And one of the things we train on is that, the word restaurant means to restore. It's a French word, restaurar. And it comes from a story from the 1860s where a guy couldn't get into any food unions in Paris. So he created his own little stews and soups shop in Paris. And he said, put a sign in his window, "Come in, you weary travelers, and my food will restore you."
Well,
and it's a perfect example of what a lot of businesses do, not just restaurants. People come in, they're frustrated, they've got an issue they've got to deal with. Our job is to restore them, to bring them back. And send them on their way, restored, so that now they can go on for the next half of their day.
Absolutely. And I think that story resonates so well. Even in my household, if someone in the family is not fed and they're hungry, their overall attitude, I'm just like, okay, I know why you're acting. I know why you're acting this way. And it's because you're hungry. So let's solve this first. And then we will talk about what I want to talk about with you.
Oh, I have a rule. I never bring up anything until we're done with breakfast.
For me, it's when I have my coffee.
Yeah, my coffee is important too, but that's for me. But for them, I want them to have breakfast, because then they're more receptive. And I think that we all are. It's physiological. We don't always identify it that way, but it really is a physiological thing. And I've seen it happen so many times where people, anybody who has kids know that they could be bouncing off the wall, and then you feed them, all of a sudden everything's okay. But it's physiological for us in the real world. And again, you see people overreacting in restaurants today on the media because they may have low blood sugar, and there must be a bunch of other reasons, and there's no right to act like that. None at all. But the training has to be to not take what they're saying personal, because lots of people say things they don't mean to say just because they've been they think that, oh, I should say this. But what we have to do is train people to not take it personal, not follow people into little brain mode, and sort of get them the food, get them what they want. Invariably, people will apologize for saying the wrong thing or using the wrong tone of voice. But make no mistake, the tone is the message when we're communicating. And you can say all the right words in the wrong tone, and it will have a completely different meaning. And you can say, I think that when you use the right tone, it has a power that I've seen happen so many times. It can take over a negative situation and it can make it calm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tone is everything. And also that nonverbal communication, right? The way we smile, the way we look at someone, our posture, I think that also gives it away a lot.
It does. And I call those are tones. It's a facial tone. Mm-hmm. It's a body tone. It is that language that basically it's telling people it's whether or not what's coming out of your mouth is in alignment with your body. And I think that it really does. If the tone of voice sends a message to the rest of the body, how you should be acting. And so if the tone of voice, I give a lot of pressure to the tone of the voice, because it leaves your mouth and it creates an atmosphere and it creates that ripple effect. And it's really hard to be gritting your teeth and have a nice tone of voice. So it really, these are little tricks that we can use. And one of the difficult things that I give presentations to different school age kids, high school and even college, is a lot of them haven't been taught basic communication skills. They've acquired communication skills with the people around them. And if the people around them were good communicators, they acquired good communication skills. But a lot of people, they have some empty areas where they haven't learned some ways to communicate. And that's what we have to sort of educate and teach people how to communicate on a one-on-one personal level.
Absolutely. And actually, this leads me to the question of, is there a prime age? Because I sense that really being able to tap into your big brain, understanding that the little brain is potentially telling you to react in a certain way, that also comes a lot with maturity and with growth. If you're speaking with high school students, potentially they are very impulsive and they're still, as you've mentioned, learning how to communicate and what the right way of communicating is. Is there a prime age where you say, okay, by this time, at this age, this person is really in control of that little brain because experience, situations have taught them the importance of being rational, not responding immediately to something, but really taking time to think about it?
I don't know if there's a prime age, because I think the big brain is developing the entire time. The little brain's that primal brain, but the big brain is constantly developing as people grow and as they get older. But the little brain is still there, and I think you can use big brain, little brain with children, and we have to help them understand that's the wrong word to use. Okay, because that's kind of a little brain word, and we call it the S word, as stupid, right? We don't want to use that word. So what else can we do? And so we can train that at any age, but I've seen people who should know better use their little brains when they're in their 50s and their 70s and their 80s, even in their 40s. So the little brain is still there. It wants to take over. That impulsive little brain wants to, but the more people have trained their big brain and trained their neutral, how to get to neutral, and as you point, in a situation where somebody says something you don't agree with, you don't have to immediately say anything about it. That's neutral. That's where you go, okay, thank you. That's interesting. But I think that any age, we have the potential, our little brain wants to take over. Different situations, different parts of life, little brain is more active. When people are traveling, little brain is very active, because they could be tired, they could be hungry, they could be under time pressure. And especially today, there's so much uncertainty that it's really creating this tension for people. That's where little brain wants to take over. Little brain will always be with us, but the more we can get big brain and neutral to take control of these moments, the more strategic we're going to be about having a smoother path for our future.
Absolutely. Kevin, when you wrote your book, did you have an ideal reader in mind?
That's a great question. It was definitely someone in their 20s. And it was definitely someone in their 20s. I had been dealing with this and learning these lessons my entire life. But one of my lessons came from my daughter when she was 5. And I didn't think my 5-year-old was going to be teaching me how to communicate. And this is where that chapter on tone comes in, is that I'm under a Christmas tree trying to put everything together. And I see my 5-year-old start walking up the ladder. I just see her feet. I go, oh, Caitlin, get down from there. Right? Nice, calm tone. Mm-hmm. But daddy. And then she goes up the next rung of the ladder. I raise my, Caitlin, come on, get down from there. Right? Oh, because that'll work. And I said, but daddy, and then she goes to the next rung. And I get out from under the tree and I'm ready to launch in full little brain mode. I'm ready to launch Caitlin Rose, right? But I didn't say a word because I looked at her and she was holding an angel. And she obviously wanted to put it on top of the tree and surprise me. And so I looked at her and I said, Caitlin, that's dangerous. You've got to get down from there. He says, but daddy, I like that tone better.
Wow.
Whoa. Here's my 5-year-old teaching me about tone. Here's my 5-year-old. And I just feel so grateful that I was able to listen to that. Throughout life, we're going to be picking up all these little lessons, but kids get it. Kids are more in tune to tone than adults. Adults we can pivot away from it, but kids really get it. I think that our challenge as we grow is to teach the people around us to be better communicators, because they'll have a nicer life. And we won't have to clean up anything. We won't have to go back and say, yeah, that was wrong, or you won't be called into HR next week because you made a foolish joke.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I think about it, for leadership, for leaders, an incredible book to read. For someone who's potentially just starting off their career and wanting to find that right way of communicating with others, ideal. For someone, as you've mentioned, in high school, who's just embarking on their journey, later potentially looking for internships, ideal. And then myself, I'm a professional, I'm also a mom. And I think so often, you mentioned kids pick up tone so easily and quickly. If I sigh, or if I do a sigh around my son, or if I say something in a slightly irritated voice, he's like, "Oh, mommy, you're angry." No, yeah. I'm not angry. And then I'm like, okay, note to self for next time, don't sigh when answering the question.
Note to self is a great neutral word too, because it really does remind us sometimes that just because we're under pressure, or because there's different influences for that day happening in our life, and we misspeak, or we don't, we use our little brain, we can very quickly go back and clean that one up. The sooner we say, you know what, I shouldn't have said it like that. You know what, yesterday, when you asked me that question, I didn't answer that properly. And it really does come down to just the quicker you can recognize your own little brain moments, the more it helps the people around you with that. And my daughters have taught me a lot about my own tone growing up, and just generally my need to tune into them and really understand how to communicate with them has taught me so much, because it doesn't matter that that quote, you're the boss, you're the mom, you're the dad. It doesn't matter to them. What matters is that genuine communication that they take with them the next day. And I love my daughters too much to ever miscommunicate with them. But if I say something wrong, I will immediately apologize.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Kevin, your book is obviously available on Amazon, Big Brain, Little Brain. You were also featured in an article by Forbes, named as one of 10 authors that will make you rethink small decisions. Absolutely loved us. Tell the listeners how they can learn more about the work that you're doing.
Well, the website is bigbrainlittlebrain.com. And I have a couple of worksheets there that you can download for free. One of them is a list of the things that that activate you in your life, so you can identify them, so that you can see them coming. And the other one is a place to put your neutral words and your neutral phrases, so that you can identify them and practice them. Those are the two things that I think would help people immediately learn how to nudge their communication closer to big brain.
Amazing. And you have to tell us, what's your most used neutral word?
Well, my most neutral word is okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Thank you very much. But I think everybody has their own, and I recommend what we give examples in the book, but I also recommend coming up with your own. So it's you and it's your words. It's your saying it. I think we all have it. We all have a word that we use, but I think that it will really help calm a lot of people down. And I think the world could get to neutral. It would be helpful.
Absolutely. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the Stay Human podcast. I really enjoyed our chat. I absolutely loved having Kevin on the Stay Human podcast. That was such an insightful conversation. And I think I walked away from it thinking, what is my neutral word? What are the things that trigger me? And what are the situations, even in the past week, where I potentially had to rethink my reactions to certain things. So hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording that episode. Grab a copy of Kevin's book on Amazon, Big Brain, Little Brain, and I'll see you here next week for a brand new episode. Take care. Bye-bye.